Welcome to the World of Rare Disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. My name is Lisa Deck, and I am a Rare New England Committee member and your host for today's show. Today, our show features Shelley Bowen, who will share her personal connection to Barth Syndrome and educate us about this rare, complex disorder. Shelley Bowen serves as the Director of Family Services and Advocacy of the Barth Syndrome Foundation, as well as being a founding member of the organization. When Shelley received the diagnosis of Barth syndrome for her children, this disorder was nameless and described as fatal. She has worked tirelessly since then to ensure that not one more child will suffer or perish from this disorder. I spoke with Shelley prior to this interview and am blown away by her wisdom, passion, and dedication to the families of Barth syndrome. Thank you for being here today, Shelley.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. We would like to start and jump right in. You can forward it. Can you tell me what Barth syndrome is and tell me a little bit about the symptoms and experiences of a Barth patient?
Sure. Barth syndrome is X-linked, so it's predominantly it affects males. If it's carried, it can be carried by the mother, but she's generally asymptomatic because there's something known as skewed X inactivation. So it's basically you have two copies of an X chromosome. So when it gets to that mutant gene, the mother has a detour and can go over to the functioning gene, or the functioning gene where tavazin is expressed. So we don't see a lot of women affected. It does happen, but the boys. I'm trying to get away from calling them boys because we're seeing girls being diagnosed, and we would never, when you're rare, you're very sensitive about excluding anyone. But it affects the mitochondria. So there is a problem with a lipid metabolism with this disease. It's an inborn error of metabolism. And mitochondria is required for really any muscle that needs energy. And this lipid is not formed properly. So the mitochondria isn't able to work, and the boys, I do it again. They get they get exhausted. The people who have it, they get very exhausted. They have fatigue. It affects their cardiac muscles, so it can cause an enlarged heart. There's some congenital defects where you'll see some deepening of the they call it trabeculations, but it's basically the grooves of the heart. And it can cause, blood can get lodged in there, and it can cause clotting and can cause a stroke. It causes neutropenia, which is a reduction of a particular white blood cell that is essential for fighting infection, and overall just weakness, global skeletal weakness.
Right. And when you talked to me last time, you talked about the benefit of a diagnosis. And can you elaborate a little bit about that and why that's so hard to come to, or has been hard and still to this day?
Well, I think that to begin with, any one of the aspects of Barth syndrome is rare. So neutropenia, pediatric cardiomyopathy is rare. So a doctor might see it and not really put everything together. They think virus first. And if it's muscles, they'll look at other well-known muscular dystrophies, such as Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. But the therapy or the treatment, the approach to care is going to be somewhat different. So, for example, a drug that you may use to treat the cardiomyopathy would lead to drug-induced neutropenia. But these boys have it. So you give that, and it just exacerbates the problem. And my thought is when my kids were small, I was told it didn't matter what you called it. It wasn't going to be treated any differently. And I don't buy into that, because I think that the diagnosis is the first step to therapies and doing something about it. If you told a firefighter there's a fire, and he came in and the fire was started by chemicals, he's not going to throw water on it. It's going to make it worse. If it's oil, you don't throw water on an oil fire, it makes it worse. It explodes, right? So you need to know what caused it in order to extinguish it. So I believe that a diagnosis is key really for anybody. It's just, I think it's an insult to anyone to say it doesn't matter what you call it. It does.
Right. And that transitions a little bit about your personal experience with Barth syndrome. And I know you telling it to me is such a moving, heartbreaking story, but I was wondering if you might be able to share that again.
Sure. So what happened with us was that we really, there was no family history. I'm the first carrier, so there was no family history. My boys, my son, Michael, had a cough. He couldn't shake it. He was 13 months old. Evan was 26 months old. And we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. But I knew there was just this gut factor. And there's no code for gut factor, right? You don't have that. So I had to take Michael to the hospital, and I knew that he had to be seen, but I couldn't get him in anywhere. We had just moved and everything. So we went in, and come to find out Michael was in multi-system organ failure. It wasn't a cold after all. So I had gone from being, the receptionist slamming the window and saying, we have a neurotic mom out here whose kid is off, to a crash cart coming in and my son being, put in an ambulance and rushed to the hospital. So 11 days after Michael was in, my son Evan, my aunt is a nurse practitioner, and said, something's really wrong. So he came in, and sure enough, he was sick. And so we didn't know, what was going on. Just 10 days earlier, Evan had come in because my aunt was concerned that maybe something was going on. And the doctor didn't even check him. He says, you have every reason to be hysterical, right? Because your other son is sick, and just go up, your son's dying, go spend time with him. He didn't even check him. And I think I wanted to believe it, so I let it go. But after Evan was admitted, everything came apart. So they couldn't understand why these two beautiful, healthy-looking boys suddenly became ill. They were behind on their shots or on their vaccines because they were sick all the time. So I was considered to be a bad mother. So my home was searched for illicit drugs. I was assigned a caseworker to oversee, to make sure there was no abuse going on. Our home was labeled as a sick home, and we had to move while the boys were sick. My daughter had to go live with a family member that she didn't really know because I was terrified they were going to take her away. And we got her back as soon as possible when we got a doctor who was our advocate and said, this is crazy. So we went on, and I would pack the boys up, and we'd go in the double stroller, and I'd go to the medical library back in the day when there was something called, the card catalog, which nobody knows what
Right.
it is now. And I looked for answers, and I'd try to put everything together, and I became as familiar as I could be with the terms in order to do something. But it became a quest. It was just a quest because I had to know what the diagnosis was. So in April of 1990, Evan got sick again. We were at the circus, and he was just off again.
So
And
again, another
it
mother's
was
intuition.
off. He was definitely off, and I couldn't say, what's this? This is something we need to do, but he was just off. And so on the way home, I asked my husband to just go ahead and drop me off at the hospital. Let's get him checked out, and then we can have I'll come home as soon as I possibly can. So he did, and again, much to my surprise, Evan was in heart failure. So this went on for a little while, and one of the doctors suggested that we do, that Evan have have a catheterization done. So we agreed because we wanted to see what was going on, and at that point we were thinking heart transplant. So Evan had the cath, and a code was called, and I was in the waiting room full of people, and sitting there thinking, oh, that's my baby. That's my baby. And I didn't want to be hysterical, and I didn't want to run and scream because I wanted them to look at my baby. And so I rushed to the door, and I thought, well, maybe if I'm closer to him, he'll feel my energy, they'll bring him back. And the doors burst open, and my beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed little boy was sitting up in the gurney, and he said, hey, Mommy, and he's holding his magic wand. And then I thought, well, it wasn't him. So I have to think about the other mother. Went back to the waiting room. The doctor emerges, and he says, Evan had a cardiac arrest. It was Evan. And he said it took us quite a bit to get him back. His heart is worse than we thought. And do you have any questions? And I said, this is a doctor who told me that I was the mother and let him be the doctor. And, I don't know what mothers do but protect their children, right? So I said, I want a genetic consult. And he said, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's going to still be the same, which at that point, I had reached my level of where I wasn't going to take it anymore. And I went into the Shirley MacLaine terms of endearment crazy mom, and I just said, you didn't hear me. I want a genetic consult. He ordered it. The geneticist came in and saw the boys. It just so happened that Michael was there visiting his brother. And he said, I remember reading this article years ago. And he said, I think I know what's going on with your kids, but I'm certain it's genetic. So I thought, well that's
Something.
Great. We have our first forward step. So Evan got sick again. We were hospitalized again in June, or he was hospitalized. I wasn't, he was. And my husband brought the mail to me, and there was a package from the geneticist. And there in this package was the journal article that described my boys. I mean, it was like I was reading somebody who was like Santa Claus who had been reading or seeing everything that was happening in our life. And I thought, for the first time, I thought, there's hope. There's really hope. And I remember looking over at Evan as he lay there sleeping and thinking, if somebody can write about it, somebody can describe it, somebody can do something.
Wow.
And Evan had a cardiac arrest 2 hours later and died. So I had to go home. The disorder was described as being uniformly fatal in infancy. And I had to go home to Michael, who had pneumonia, and wondering if I was going to bury 2 babies in the same week. So that was kind of how we got our foot in the door, if you will, to the diagnosis. But we went on for many years, and then when Michael was 10 in 1996, he went into heart failure again. So I thought, I'm going to go see Dr. Barth in the Netherlands.
So at this point, they had identified it as Barth Syndrome.
No,
Or-
at that point,
Or
yeah.
in
right.
in the
In 96.
article, but in the article it described him, but didn't have a name
It
yet.
didn't have a name.
And eventually, you find out that this doctor is the one who found him. And tell me the story about how you contacted him, because there's nothing like a mother on a mission.
There really isn't. They say that, there's the difference between a mom and a Rottweiler is that a Rottweiler will let go eventually, But I think that's true for anybody in search of a rare disease, whether it's for themselves or whether it's for your child. I remember my father had Parkinson's, and I remember him watching C-SPAN day after day after day after day, waiting to hear something, about healthcare, and thinking that, maybe one day something will happen. But you have hope. You just have hope. You don't rely upon somebody. There's something different. But yeah, I just thought, there was a question about what was going to happen with Michael. And there was, once again, we were talking about a transplant, which is pretty permanent. And it is permanent, and that once there is a transplant, there's anti-rejection drugs. It's certainly an option, and I know that people do very well. But again, I wanted that fire put out for the right reasons. And we had spent many years trying to nail down that diagnosis to just, get it confirmed, but the gene hadn't yet been discovered. So I told Michael, my husband, I'm going to call Dr. Barth. And he laughed me off, but he knew not to tell me no. And he said, well, if he had polio, would you call Jonas Salk? I said, well, if he had internet, I probably would. I'd get in touch with him. So I found a way. I'd never dialed an international call, and I got on the phone, knew the operator by name at that point. It's like, how do you dial it? What do I do? Do they speak English? It was just I was so naive. Mm-hmm. And so I got on, when I finally got over, I woke up at 3:00 in the morning, and I called, and I asked to speak with Dr. Barth. First question is do you speak English? And the Dutch are so polite. They speak English better than us. And they said, a little. And, so they put me through to the next person. And then eventually I heard, this voice that was very deep, and it was I said, may I speak to Peter Barth? And this voice says, this is Peter Barth. And I thought, oh, wow, you know, he was so austere. And all of a sudden, all of the questions just come rushing out. And he said, why don't you fax me a list of your questions and I'll respond to them. And I did. And the last question is, will you see Michael? And he responded the next day to my questions and said he had made an appointment for Michael to come to Amsterdam 6 weeks later.
That is truly one of those stories that you hear. There's no end for what you will do for your child, and that's what you did. And so you went over there and had the appointment. And was he as austere as you expected him to be?
His voice, no. He was, I don't know how to describe him. He was very academic, let's put it that way. Very smart, very wise man, and became a very dear friend over the years. But he, he took Michael out, and we went to see some castles, and Michael just wanted to see windmills, and took Michael on a trip to go see windmills, and it was a very special time for Michael and for me. And he, one of the things he said to me while Michael was playing in this garden that was made for this child who had passed away, I told him, I said, it's just invisible. If it was apparent, people would take it seriously, how bad it is. And I'm challenged to get people to take me seriously, that it's really important to get this diagnosis and everything he's going through. And he said, the cruelest irony of this disease is how deceptively healthy these children appear, even in times of life-threatening crisis. And, it was very true. And he says, your journey is a lot like mine. There have been diseases, and people say, why are you fighting so hard for these hopeless diseases? And he said, because I don't believe anything is without hope.
Wow.
So he was, he was just, that's the man, not the doctor. But on top of it, he's a great scientist.
Right.
But while we were there, we had submitted our blood to Italy. So our family's blood had gone, and they had been able to do some mapping, but the gene at that point when we left had not yet been discovered. Dr. Barth and his group were very close to the Italian group, and so while we were there, the tissue from my boys were compared. It was compared by Dr. Barth and his team under electron microscope to the original pedigree that was described in 1983. And so this subjective look at, does it fit, does it not, it looks like an egg, is it an egg, or what is it, it was finally, he said, yes, it's, it is consistent, what I'm seeing, with their mitochondria and the original pedigree. And I had explained that the blood had gone to Italy, and he says, we're very close with that group. We've been working with him. And he came in, he said, excuse me, and I didn't know what he was doing. And he came back, he called, and come to find out they had discovered the gene while I was in Amsterdam, and Michael's blood was a part of it. And for the first time, we had a confirmed diagnosis. Then suddenly I'm thinking, wow, so I've been told everybody's dead. So now I have the one living child with this disease, and that was overwhelming. But Dr. Barth said there's others out there, and you need to find them, and together you can make a difference for one another together.
And I think that's what you have eventually done, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think your story continues with Michael too, which is something I'd love for you to share, but it's heart-wrenching that one family has to go through so much.
Yeah, with Michael was incredible. He, I'm blown away that I've been so fortunate to have the children that I have. We also have a daughter, Alana, who is my oldest, and she's almost 40 now. But Michael got sick again in 2009. And he was at that point, he was in college, and he had a life ahead of him. He had high hopes of having a home and a family, and we were told there was no way it could wait anymore. He had to have a transplant. So he waited. He really waited, because he he wanted it to be the right decision. He didn't want to talk about it, but he never considered himself sick. And he said, I can't get beyond that, thinking that somebody has to die in order for me to live. He got to the point that, he was in the hospital for 5 months, and he wouldn't listen to the news because he was wondering, is that my heart? He was near to hear the helicopter come in, and he'd wonder, is that my heart?
Right. That's a perspective I've never thought about. I've never thought about that perspective.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I mean, you feel torn because people are going to die. And my stance on that is that people die, children die, babies die. The time to talk about these things is not when your child goes through a window and you're standing at bedside in the worst moment of your life. You're having one of the most important conversations you could ever have, and that is about organ donation. The time to talk about these things is when the child is playing. The time to talk about whether you will accept a transplant or you'll donate organs is when somebody is well, and have those conversations, because it could be the most important time ever. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. And we waited, and Michael, around the holidays, Michael he needed to get out of the hospital. He had a little infection in his arm, and so the doctor sprung him for a furlough, as Michael called it. And Michael came home, and with a bow wrapped around his neck, he said, I've been kind of busy. It was on my birthday. And he said, I hope I'll do. And he gave me a hug. It was wonderful. So he was home with us for 20 days, and he woke up and he said, Mom, I really don't feel good. The weather is kind of like it is right now, dreary, and I said, let's go to the hospital. And he didn't want to go because he had promised a friend to take him to work. And I said, just call him and tell him you can't. We'll go to the hospital. And he said, no, a man's only as good as his word. And I'm not going to have my friend walking in the rain to work. So he went, picked him up, took him to work. And he said, okay, I'll go. Called the ambulance. He refused to get on the stretcher. He walked. And we took him to the hospital. I followed the ambulance and came in. And it was apparent that he was not well. And he was breathing very heavy. And I just said, Michael, hang on. And he took the oxygen mask off, and he said, you're so bossy. I mean, I could just hear it. You're so bossy. And I said, okay, do it your way. And he took 2 more breaths, and he was gone. And the heart never came. And it was done. I'd wanted Barth Syndrome out of my life, but not like that.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like you had 2 exceptional boys in your life.
I did.
And not only while they were living, but now they're a part of you forever, and a part of what you've left for this world with the Barth Syndrome Foundation. And it sounds, I don't even know how to make that transition, but truly you have given your heart and soul to this, and you have provided hope for so many others. And I think that's probably why you keep going, and because I don't know how you keep going sometimes. I mean, but you are here.
Well, friends, as you know, I didn't think I could survive the death of another child, because the death of Evan nearly put me in a grave. But, and it wasn't easy. I mean, when your child dies, your identity dies. You don't know, when somebody says, how many children do you have? You don't know what to say. Are you betraying them by saying 1 because you only have 1 living? Do you really want to get into it with a perfect stranger? A very complicated story. Your whole identity is different. Are you a mother anymore? I mean, to me, a mother is an active role, taking care of somebody. He's not here anymore, so it's just it's very different. It messes with your head. But what I was surprised by was that the people that were there with me, fighting with me for Michael's life, still needed me. There were lives, there were other mothers and other children that I loved, and I knew them by name. I knew their dogs' names. I knew everything about them. And how could I walk away because I didn't get what I wanted. I didn't get my happy ending. And I'm still in it for, I believe that a difference can come. It just may not have happened the way I wanted it to.
Right. That is like you had to dig really deep, I'm sure, to do that. And my heart breaks for you. But I am amazed, and I said this earlier, how full of passion and wisdom you are for the others. And that takes us to your role today. So in the Barth Syndrome Foundation, you are there for families and patients and children. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do to encourage them in their early days, and also to find a diagnosis? Because I'm guessing most of them come to you after a diagnosis, but maybe there's some who are suspecting. I'd love for you to share some of the advice you share with those patients.
Well, it's interesting because after Michael was a great partner, because he would offer hope, because he could get on the phone with a parent, and it would give them, hope that there would be some quality of life for their child. But at this point, I'm the one you don't want to talk to, but I'm the one that you want to talk to, because I'm the person who's going to be your ally. So the script changes a little bit. Initially, when we started out, after Dr. Barth told me that I need to find others, in between thinking that the plane is going to plummet into the sea, because I'd never flown before. How in the world do you do it? The internet wasn't even around, really until '96, and then how do you do it? So every time you did a search for Barth syndrome, it would bring out zero returns. So in 1998, I found a post that was made on the, because now I'm a dinosaur, because I was around for the genome and everything when it was mapped. But there was this human genome gateway for families and people who were connecting, who had been diagnosed, and this was like this way to bridge the barriers that geography put upon us. And I found these two posts, and I thought, wow, first time there were others. I was beginning to doubt. And so this connection was made, these stories were exchanged, and it became apparent that we needed to find more. And the only way we could really do that was to build a website. So in 1998, I figured out how to build a website, and I built a website, and within a week, 27 people from around the globe had contacted me, telling me the stories of their son, and they were diagnosed. And so all these papers that I had gone to the library and read, it's like, oh, your family BA5, oh, your family 745, whatever, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is all, there are people that are behind these journal articles. And I thought, wow, we need to imagine if we could get together. And so the other mothers I was in touch with said they agreed. And so the three of us, with no organization at this point, we're not a nonprofit, said, let's get together and let's invite the others to do it. So we did. We got together in Baltimore, and we rented a church for $25. We had Dr. Richard Kelly, who is a hero to us, invited people like Hugo Moser and Victor McCusick, who's the grandfather of PubMed, and all of these world-renowned people came to this meeting. Dr. Barth came, and they all paid their own way and got there. And the Dr. Peter Rakin, who discovered the biochemical defect for Barth syndrome, made the announcement during that meeting, which was huge, because this is key to treating the disease, and then families from all over the world. We were so poor we didn't have chairs, so we couldn't afford to set up a room because that would have cost. So we told everybody to bring pillows, and we'd sit around because it was going to be a while. And we said, do we become a nonprofit, or do we stay as that we are and just have these gatherings from time to time? And everybody agreed they wanted to become a nonprofit, and not everybody agreed that they'd help do it. So there were 5 of us, and that was how we started the foundation. That was how it started.
So I think you called it Tears to Advocacy, and that's the story. needed to find people. You built it, they came, and
Yeah.
then you truly built the organization. And where is the organization today? I know you have a new role, and we'll get to that in a different show, but how long when did you find it, and how long has it been?
It's around since we. So it was, our meeting was in June. No, yes, it was in June. It was in June of 2000.
Okay.
And I am nothing if not driven. I don't let the grass grow.
I can see that.
Because I believe that time is a luxury that we can't afford to squander, and you don't get it back. So we moved fast. It was, I had some very smart allies who we never would have met had it not been for this horrible disease that brought us together and this common bond to do something about it. And so we all threw in what talent and what resources we had to make it happen. So we were incorporated in December of that year, 2000, and received our, because it was so rare, we got our preliminary IRS ruling as a 501c3 in January of 2001. So in 7 months, we were established as a nonprofit. And from there, we started our first strategic plan. I was the first chair. And we've had many, many changes since. But from the very beginning, we realized that to turn stories into science and science into therapies, you needed to be strategic. It didn't happen. We weren't, all about hope. Hope is good to have, but you can't swallow it, and it's not going to fix it. So you got to be smarter. You got to work harder, and you can never say I can't, never, because you can't. Somebody who has Barth Syndrome doesn't have the option to say I can't have it. So you have to do something about it.
Truly amazing just to see what you've created in going on 2 decades now of having the organization. And I think it just speaks to your sons and their legacy and what you did for them and what they are doing for so many others. So thank you. It's such a touching story, and I can't even put words to it sometimes, but I do appreciate you sharing, and I think our viewers will really connect to the story, and it's so good for them to understand a different rare disease. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Before closing, we want to provide our viewers with an opportunity to share comments or ask questions from our prior shows. Rare New England in Motion is the perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. After watching the show on the Every Life Foundation, a viewer asked how to specifically get involved with state advocacy here in Massachusetts. We encourage you to check out our legislative page on rarenewengland.org. Details about the work we're doing and actions you can take are found there. Thank you for your inquiry. That's our show for today. If you have a follow-up question or comment, please send them to us at info@rarenewengland.org. We will share your responses on our next show. Thank you again to Shelley Bowen for being here. It really was an amazing conversation. And from all of us at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think zebras. Thank you.